Good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen of the community. My name is Tony Laurenti. I'm a rated captain on the Embraer 195 aircraft. That is my current position. Previous, I was a rated captain on a Citation Sovereign private business jet, Citation 680. Prior to that, I was a rated captain for a major airline network regional affiliate on the Embraer 145 regional jet aircraft. Prior to that, a rated captain on the turbopropeller aircraft for a major airline network. I have near 30 years of flight experience, over 16,000 hours of flight experience hours, and I'm a certificated flight instructor, single, multi-engine land, as well as a rated basic, instrument, and advanced FAA ground instructor. Cutting to the chase of qualifications, I'm responding directly to questions that were raised regarding aircraft performance and potential illegalities of 737-800 aircraft landing at the airport. Such accusations are false. I will verify the falsehood espoused in that regard by citing and showing regulations and then using a generic flight planning calculator for a 737-800 as well as 700 series aircraft and frankly a 900 series aircraft if one wishes. While again these are not official renditions or official calculations, as a professional pilot, I have vetted this calculator. It passes the so-called sniff test, and until something else better is found, namely a 737 itself, we'll go ahead and use this. But what you have in front of you right now are first the federal regulations, Title 14, Part 121, Subpart 195. Very simply, these are the regulations that pertain to the dispatch of an aircraft. They are not related to in-flight decisions. This said, these regulations are pertinent when dispatching, aka launching an aircraft. In order to comply with regulations, the dispatch release and conditions of such must be met. Per this regulation, I have it scrolling here for you. I don't expect you to read it at this point. But this is the regulation. Of note, when you look at it, it pertains to dispatching of the aircraft and is not in any way related to the in-flight decision-making that is required, that I'll show you in just a moment through use of a flight planning calculator. So to walk away from this, the most important matter is this is a dispatch document, not a flight document. But this is what allows the aircraft to be legally dispatched, and if these conditions are not met, the airplane does not take off to begin with this particular flight. These conditions have to be met. I don't know that you can see here, but when you look up the regulation, you'll see that there are requirements that the aircraft has to actually be shown to stop in 60% of the landing distance available, i.e. the runway, in order for it to be legally dispatched. This means legal requirements dictate a buffer in the dispatch. They're not dispatching the aircraft to use all available runway length. They have to be shown through their performance calculations prior to flight to be able to stop on 60% of the available runway. They have to show they are not required to use all of the runway length, only 60%. So that takes care of a safety buffer, a safety cushion for the dispatch. Now, moving right along into a calculator, which we have here. Again, forgive me, I'm not a technical expert, and this was sort of done very impromptu. That's the calculator. I don't have access to a Boeing 737 at this very moment, nor my own aircraft, but rest assured this is reliable for the purposes of discussion and educating the public on the basic principles of what goes into now in-flight decision-making. This is what we do as a crew in flight prior to landing. We use onboard equipment, of course, as opposed to our iPads. But again, technology's crept in numerous ways. But regardless, we use these in-flight calculators to estimate and predict landing distances. You can see here, I'm using the 700 version. I'll show you as I change numbers and parameters. Rest assured, we have to change parameters for any given landing based on the conditions at a given time of landing. These conditions include temperature, wind, runway condition. These are all listed here. You have also flap settings. Airplanes use different flap settings. They also use auto brake settings or different braking techniques, and these are all inputs made to this flight calculator. So again, I'm showing you some of the parameters of a landing and the factors that go in, and I will direct your attention. I used in this case a 700 model, 40 degrees of flaps. Altitude is listed as 0 because that's the field elevation of Tweed. I used 200 for runway direction. Of note, I used no wind. Wind was not used. Wind actually reduces the distances that would be predicted. So I assumed a worst case scenario. No wind. Again, wind would improve these numbers. I also used a standard, or actually an 82 degree Fahrenheit or 28 degree centigrade temperature. That's pretty common in the summer. We could make it hotter, of course, and maybe we will for the purpose of demonstration. Also, I used 0 runway slope. That is actually a factor. Tweed's runway slope is not exceptional, so I used a 0 factor. I used the field elevation, far end and approach end. Again, minutia, but just to show you the principles, and the runway length of 5,600 feet. And again, here are the actual conditions that I used for this example. No headwind, no crosswind, no gust, crosswind, an additive of 5 knots. That's again another buffer, temperature of 82 Fahrenheit. ISA, not something pertinent, that's above international standard atmosphere. And here are the operational landing distance numbers. It's a simple table. I'll give you a better view. The conditions of the runway would be dry, good braking action, medium braking action, or poor. These are as reported by airport operational vehicles or other aircraft, and they are affected by the field condition, that being rain, snow, ice. Snow, ice, anything frozen in nature will be detrimental to braking action. So in cases where it's snowing and the plows are out, if the aircraft or the airport can only achieve medium braking conditions, you'll see the number under, say, max auto brake of 6,445. By example, that shows you that exceeds the runway length at Tweed. So if those conditions were faced, the obvious method would be to divert or wait for the runway conditions to be improved. But if you notice, of course, when it's 82 degrees out, you're not going to have poor braking action. You're going to have either a dry runway or a wet runway, again, as dictated by these braking condition reports. So if you'll direct your attention, in the case of maximum auto brake or max manual application of the brakes by the flight crew, you see the distances to be 4,430 feet or 3,815 feet, versus if the pilots selected only auto brake level 1, the requirement for the runway would be 7,760 feet. Therefore, they would not land with auto brake setting 1 at Tweed. This is not an exceptional procedure. Auto brake levels are built into the aircraft for this very reason. And then just of note, this shows you that the data includes a 15% safety margin and a 1,500-foot air distance from the threshold to touchdown, which actually means these distances reflect the airplane crossing the threshold at 50 feet, then touching down, then stopping, so it's not actual stopping distance. Now, again, forgive me because we're kind of impromptu. I'm going to change the conditions to a 737-800. Again, you see flaps 40. I'll change that in a moment, but I'm going to recalculate. You see the conditions, and there below, essentially the numbers haven't really changed. I've already forgotten the ones I previously read, but you see under auto brake max 4,530, and then max manual braking, that meaning the pilot applying the brakes as opposed to the auto brake, 3815. These are numbers all below the length of the runway, and this also includes with good braking action where there might be a condition of wetness on the runway. I'm going to go ahead and randomly change some numbers here. I'm going to keep runway 20. I'm going to put in 20 knots of wind. That's wind on the nose. That effectively will reduce these numbers and improve landing distance. And you'll see below let's see here. As you can see, it's not taking the computations right now because I'm entering 20 knots of wind. And that's because I was entering it wrong. The steady state wind here will be 20 knots. Wind direction 200, just to show you a direct headwind. And now we'll get these numbers to change. You can see I then change the parameters. They're reflected. And then the numbers change. They've been reduced by about 100 feet. So 4730 and 3965. So again, this shows you the parameters that you enter while in flight using the in-flight or onboard aircraft computer system. It's called a flight management system. We use something called ACARS and AeroData. Again, it's industry terminology, not necessary that you know that. But what's important is to reflect on discussions had about Tweed and potential illegalities of aircraft operations, which in a court of law, this of course is not fact or absolute, but rest assured, given my credentials and the fact that this is all verifiable by others such as myself, this information is true and correct. And I went and I changed the aircraft to a 700 with those conditions. And now you can see the numbers have been reduced somewhat. So closing really quickly, one other item to address. The 737-800 is a heavier aircraft than the 700. Therefore, its approach speeds and operational speeds overall are higher. So that would dictate greater use of the runway. But again, as demonstrated through this simple flight planning calculator, I'll try to show you the website. Hopefully that's in focus. Again, this is an impromptu presentation, but I feel it's important enough to respond quickly. Again, I hope that this helps in the understanding and conveyance of fact of how aircraft are operated. And statements that you may hear are unfounded regarding illegalities. There are conditions, of course, that I've alluded to where the runway numbers would exceed what's available at Tweed, and therefore diversions would occur and have occurred. However, when the airplane lands at Tweed, in the case landing we're talking about, these requirements are met. These operations are legal. These operations have a margin of safety, and I have just shown you very quickly and hope to in the future additional methodologies and conditions in which landings at Tweed are within full compliance and safe to be on board. Thanks, and have a great day.